Scripture this morning is Ephesians 3rd chapter, 17 to 20. Ephesians 3, 17 to 20. That Christ may dwell in your heart by faith, that ye being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all saints what is the breadth and length and the depth and the height, and to know the love of Christ, which passeth knowledge, that ye might be filled with all the fullness of God. Now unto him that is able to do exceeding abundantly about all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us.
Are you selling God short? Is the lesson or the title for the lesson this morning. What does that mean? Are you selling God short? Another way of phrasing this, it might be, have you set your expectations too low? If you set your expectations for God too low in your life, what is it that you expect from God? What is it that you think He can do for your life, both in this life here and in the life to come? It's interesting to me in Ephesians, the 3rd chapter, in verse 20 in particular, as Bill read, that we see that He's able to do abundantly, exceedingly more than we are able to ask or to think. Now, those are some pretty high expectations. In other words, we cannot out-expectate God for what He can do. He is able to do more than what we can even ask or think about. He will not come up short when it comes to our expectations. I thought of an example. We were 21, I think, Amanda. We got married. Oh boy, should have thought that. But I still had my senior year in college to go yet, and we paid primarily for our own wedding ourselves, and we were getting ready to do that the summer before we got married. And I had a horse I bought some time prior as an investment, and it was time to cash in on that investment. And I was shoeing horses for my father, and he came and he says, "Hey, someone just showed up and they want to see that horse you have advertised for sale." He said, "Why don't you keep working and I'll go show it to them." I said, "Well, that's great, Dad." I said, "I have it advertised for $1,200. I said, "If they make an offer, my absolute bottom line is $800. "Not a problem," he says, and off he goes to show this horse for me. He wasn't gone but a half an hour, and he's back. And I said, "Well, that was quick." He said, "Yep, they bought the horse." I said, "Well, how much did you sell it for?" He said, "Well, when we got out of the truck, I told him, listen, this young boy is still in school. He's getting married. He has a wedding to pay for. He's asking $1,200, but I know for a fact he'll take $800. Thank you, Dad. Thank you very much. Can we do that with God, though? Can we expect far less than what He's worth? Another story that may illustrate this to me. I was reading Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer to the children here a few months ago. And you may recall the part in the book where Tom is in trouble with his, I believe his aunt, and she tells him he has to whitewash the fence. And he avoids it for as long as he can, and finally he's narrowed down, he's pinned down. In one particular Saturday morning, he's sent out to do nothing else other than whitewash that fence. And Huck Finn, in an ingenious manner, starts to have the time of his life whitewashing the fence. And when his buddies would come by, he'd tell them, "You can't do this. Nope, you can't do it." Before long, they are paying him for the opportunity to do his work for him. Now, of course, he sat by and made sure it was done properly. But not only did they pay him for the opportunity to whitewash that fence, but they had the time of their lives doing it. When their time was up and it was time for him to sell the next time slot to someone else, they would beg him, "Oh, Tom, can I keep paying? Can I whitewash the fence for a while?" You know, what's really interesting about this story is behavioral economists still look at this as an example as something that actually happens in our lives today. We take this both ways. At times, we have a horrible time. We're not happy doing things that should be very pleasurable. In other times, things that aren't so great, we have the greatest enjoyment. We wait in line to do it. One of the things that's interesting is a line develops at a restaurant. You know, that restaurant becomes more popular. Why is that? Well, we look and we say, boy, everyone else is having a good time there. It must be good. And so the restaurant down the road may be every bit as good at cooking food, but we'll wait in line for 40 minutes to get into the one because everyone else is there. Spiritually, this same principle can apply. Do we underestimate how wonderful it is to praise God, to do the things that He has asked us to do in our lives? And do we undervalue what a pleasure it is to serve Him? You know, one of the greatest examples of selling something short or for far less than what it was comes from Jacob and Esau. And we remember the story in Scripture that as Esau comes back in from hunting and he's hungered, that his brother Jacob sells him stew for his birthright. Now that birthright was worth way more than stew. And yet at the moment Esau happily gave up that birthright, something that was precious and tremendously valuable, for a simple bowl of stew. You know, Jesus talked about something pretty similar to that, didn't he? Didn't he ask the question, what will a man gain, or what will a man trade in exchange for his soul? And went on to say that though he gain the entire world and lose his soul, that it has done him no good. Do people, or do we, sell God short? Think of all the examples. This isn't something new today. I got to tell you, I am prone to selling God short today. I am prone to setting my expectations too low. To expect God to take care of and to be focused on things that are of not great significance, and to overlook the things that God really has promised me that He would be there for me. But this is not unique to me. It's not unique to you, nor is it unique to our time. Because God is so great, He's made promises so wonderful to mankind that it becomes easy to sell Him short. And we see examples of it all throughout Scripture. If you think about Abraham, here's a man of great faith. We're going to look in a few minutes at one of his moments of triumph. He left his home. He left his home country and all of his family and took out to a strange country. Every step of the way, God blessed him. God supported him, and God looked out after him. But you know what? Not once, but twice, when things got really scary, he says of his wife Sarah, "This is my sister." Because he was afraid that the king of Egypt would see how beautiful his wife is and kill him so that he could have Sarah. So after God had protected him and blessed him in so many wonderful ways, he said to himself, God is not able to protect me from this Egyptian king. And so I better tell him simply that my wife is my sister. Wasn't it a very similar situation with Hagar and Ishmael? You know, here God comes to both Abram and Sarah and says, "You are going to have a child." "Oh, no, we're too old. It's impossible now. We're past the time of childbirth." And God, that through His angel, says, "No, listen, through your seed, all nations shall be blessed." Well, what do? He says, "Well, God surely will keep His promise," Sarah and Abraham say. But you know what? He must not realize that it's impossible for me, Sarah, to have a child. So what you need to do, Abraham, is to go over to Hagar and have a child with Hagar. And that must be how we can help God along on His blessing and on His promise. Isn't it interesting so oftentimes that God is able to present us promises that are beyond our imagination? They're worth more than we could ever ask or we could ever imagine. He has made preparations every step of the way. And yet when we reach difficulties in our lives, we can say, well, God needs a little bit of help from here. I know He said this is what would happen, but He doesn't completely understand, does He? I will just help out a little bit. Boy, this situation with Ishmael and Hagar is still plaguing us to this very day. The very issues in the Middle East, the conflicts that have never died down and will not die down while this earth remains, comes right back to Hagar and Ishmael. Abram sold God short when he went into Hagar and said, I will help you with your promise. What about the Israelites? Can you imagine being brought out of Egypt by the force of the 10 plagues? Here the Egyptians, or the Israelites who had been slaves for all of their lives, look in this mighty nation. It wasn't just mightier than Israelites, it was the America of the day. It was the political and military power of the known world. And yet God comes in as an unseeable force and brings that mighty nation to their very knees through a series of 10 plagues. And He brings them out and He says, I am going to give you the promised land. But what do? They get there to the very edge of the promised land. Not only has God developed or delivered them from Egypt through the Exodus, not only has He supplied for their food, their water, and their leadership as they came through the desert, but here they are at the border of the promised land, of which God said, I'm going to give you, and they send the spies in that say, we are but grasshoppers before these men. Now, do you understand exactly what that means? They're not just saying these men are big in comparison to us, which they were, by the way. But they are saying, even though God is with us, these Canaanites are just going to stomp us. We're going to go in there and try and take this promised land, and we're going to be nothing more than nuisance grasshoppers. As these people are going to stomp us. Of course, we understand in doing that, they sold God short. They had their expectations set way too low. What about the time of their history when God had provided for them, had given them that promised land? They spent 40 years after what I just described, wandering about in the wilderness until a new generation came about. Then they go into the promised land, and they receive the promised land, and they say, you know what, God? We understand you have taken care of us. We understand that you have provided for us, but we want to be like other nations. Is that a desire we have today? I don't mean other nations. I mean other people. Do we look about us today as Christians and say, I'd like to have what they have. I'd like to do what they do. I'd like to have the lifestyle that so-and-so lives. Well, we know it's common, don't we? Because we refer to it oftentimes as keeping up with the Joneses. Those Joneses, they must be fast people. Because we're always trying to keep up with them, right? But as Christians, we suffer from the same thing. We sell God short. And the Israelite says, you know what, God? I know you've made all these promises for us. But give us a king because the other nations have a king. I don't have a king. Give me a king. When it comes to the Messiah, the Christ, didn't they do the same things? In the back of your bulletin, and I shared our study, that was shared on Facebook by a approximately 12-year-old boy that put that in there. What beautiful words. But the Israelites said of the Christ, well, we're looking for a king. You know, when Jesus' popularity was at its highest, it was after he fed the 5,000. And you've got to wonder if they aren't looking at Jesus at this time and saying, here's our general, here's our conqueror. He can take an army into the field and he can supply their needs with just a couple fish. We're not going to need supply wagons to follow us along. They had a mental concept of what the Messiah was. And you know what? When God didn't meet their expectations, I don't want to say he didn't live up to their expectations, because what Jesus was exceeded the expectations of what they had. But yet they had sold God short. And when he wasn't what they were looking for, they sold him down the road. They rejected the Messiah. Once again, in Ephesians, the 3rd chapter, verses 3 through 20 in life, we would do well to remember that God is able to do immeasurably more than we ask or we imagine. We need to make sure we don't set our expectations too short. Well, how could I do that? How could I set my expectations too low? You know, Jesus talked about praying for the physical. He didn't talk about it, he did it. He says, when you pray, pray like this. And one of the first things he mentions is, Lord, or God, Father, give us our daily bread. God, or Jesus, was not against praying for the physical. And you and I should not be against praying for the physical. My prayers should include that I hope that God provides for the physical. That can't be my focus. And that's emphasized in James, the 5th chapter, or the 4th chapter. I'll share a personal example that I came to, and this may sound harsh to you, but it's a conclusion I came to. I came to a conclusion not long ago that I needed to be preaching, full time. Can you guess what my number one worry was? What do you think my biggest worry about was, Jay? Can't say even was, because I can't say it's all gone. You say money? You saying I might be worried about money?
No, just how you're going to support yourself and how you're going to do the work that I need to do.
That would take money, huh? Sounds like Jay's accusing me of being worried about money. He said to support ourselves. He's absolutely right. You know, here I'm looking at giving up a business or getting rid of a business. Best case scenario financially, that I'd be looking at half to a quarter of what I was currently making. And you know, I began to pray. I began to pray that God would help me make the right decision. Do you know what I really meant when I prayed that? And I hope you can relate to this, because this is not about how righteous I am. It's quite the opposite, in fact. I hope you can relate to it. You know what I really meant when I said, God, help me make the right decisions? What I was really praying about, deep down in my heart, was, Lord, help me to meet what you require of me without me giving up too much. Give me a way to do this so that I'm not in financial risk. Do this in a way that I'm not ever hurting for money, that I don't have to give up what I've worked so hard for. And as I prayed, I couldn't help but think, after quite some weeks of praying about this, that when the first century Christians prayed out to God for help, as they were being torn asunder, as they were being fed to lions, as they were being demanded to say, deny Christ or die, deny Jesus is the Christ or your children will be burned at the stake. You know what Jesus said through his prophet John in the book of Revelation? He didn't say, I'm going to come down and I'm going to squash the Romans. He didn't say, I'm going to give you a job that will help you support yourselves. He didn't say, I'm going to give you a general to deliver you from those conquering you, he said, don't forget, I gave you a virgin. A baby, I meant to say. I gave you a baby born of a virgin. Lord, I'm about to be burned at the stake. What's Jesus going to do for me? Lord, I'm about to lose my job. What's Jesus going to do for me? Lord, the bank's about to foreclose on my house. What's Jesus going to do for me? My conclusion in my prayer was that God doesn't care about my bank account. I came to believe that firmly. God doesn't care if my bank account shows a negative $5,500, $55,000. God doesn't care. Is that harsh? I don't think so. Because God said, I gave you life. I gave you life abundantly. I gave you what is going to take care of all life's problems. You know what I figured out in life? And I'm sure that many of you have come to the same conclusion. It doesn't matter what my bank account says, how good it is. I have problems when it's too low. But you know what happens when it gets high too? It looks pretty good. You think I still have problems? I still have problems. I have problems either way. And James said, you ask and you do not receive. Lord, I prayed. I prayed that you would take care of my bank account. I prayed that you would take care of my job. I prayed that you would heal me physically. And you do not receive because you ask amiss, the King James says, or the English Standard Version says, because you ask with wrong motives, that you can spend it on your passion. You know what? When I'm sick, I spent the time not long ago, short time, thank God. I spent some time so sick that I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to continue to work. I prayed for my health. Did I pray for my health so that I could serve the Lord? Did I say, Lord, help me regain my health so I can work harder for you? Maybe at days. Maybe other times I just didn't want to hurt. Maybe other times I just didn't want to be afraid. But friendship, as James went on to say, with this world is enmity, or makes us enemies with the Lord. You know, in no way do I mean to suggest that it's wrong to pray for money, that it's wrong to pray for health, that it's wrong to pray for security in our jobs. But our focus needs to be on the expectations of God, to realize that through His kingdom, He has blessed us immeasurably, and it's going to overcome all things physical. And my physical condition is relevant as it relates to God. Because if God restored my bank account, it wouldn't do me the good I would hope for. That He's given me what will ultimately save us. You know, when you look at the chapter of faith, I have Abraham and Moses, and we're all but out of time here this morning. But when you look at these people, see if every example in Hebrews, the 11th chapter, doesn't fit this example. Abraham there, as we mentioned before, left his home and left his family. God said, come to a country I'll show you. Now, Abraham didn't even have the benefit of saying, Lord, now where is that on the map? Would you show that to me? He just said, go. And Abraham went. And Moses did the same. We read of Moses that he gave up the pleasures. He was living in the king's house. He was living in the mansion, the big house, we might say. And we read that he chose rather to suffer the affliction of God's people than to live the pleasures of the world. You know, verse 16 of that chapter is so interesting because it talks about All these people went for something they didn't see. They put their goals and their efforts and their focus on things that weren't seen. And verse 16 says, if they wanted to, they could have returned. They could have given up on that world, that city built by God, and went back to the city that they knew was built by their loved ones. But they pressed on because their expectations were on the same plane as God's. It's interesting to me, in the 12th chapter, that next chapter, how do we do that? He says, seeing that we're encompassed about with such a great cloud of witnesses, seeing that we've got so many wonderful witnesses, let us look unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. And in the next several verses, this is written to Christians, it says, don't resent the chastising of the world. Don't resent giving up this worldly pleasures, the temporary issues that are upon this world, because God has got things in store for us. His expectations are far higher. And by the time we get to the 12th verse of that chapter 12, we read, "Wherefore, lift up the hands which hang down and the feeble knees, and make straight the paths of your feet, lest that which is lame be turned out of the way, and let it rather be healed." The Hebrew writer is saying to the Christians, don't become feeble, don't become weary, don't give up, and become overwhelmed with what you give up on this world, because there are greater things on God. Let's not sell God short. Let's not set our expectations too low, but rather strive to shoot for the same goals that He has for us. If we do that and are faithful unto death, we have the promise that was read to us a couple of times that He is able and that He will, beyond measure, bless us with more than we can ever ask or imagine. This morning, if you've not accepted the conditions of that promise by believing in Jesus, by confessing Him before men, by repenting of your sins and being immersed for the remission of those sins, why keep them waiting? Why not come forward this morning to that invitation call and accept those immeasurable blessings? Let's together stand and sing.